Well, this is a film that I have been dying to see for a long time, and it's also a film quite a few people have wanted me to review for quite some time. But I was only able to see it yesterday because, for whatever reason, even though it's been out in America and most of the rest of the world, I think, actually, since November, it only came out in this country there fairly recently. Not entirely sure why that is, but that's just the way it's worked out. Very annoying, but I have finally gotten around to seeing it, and I was absolutely dying to see it because it's just sort of a really kind of interesting concept, basically the video game equivalent of Toy Story, video game characters. As soon as the human world has turned their back, they go off and do their own thing, they have their own society, they go around and just talk to other characters in video games, and they have their own rules, they have their own events, they have their own sort of way of living out their lives in video games. And I kind of assumed, judging just from the trailers that I saw, that it was going to be basically what Shrek was to it was going to be to video games what Shrek was to fairy tales. It was just going to be video game related jokes and video game related gags. And oddly enough, the first half hour basically is that. It's just sort of the main character Ralph jumping around from game to game, trying to find sort of some way to fit in and accomplish something other than just being the bad guy in the game that he's in. There's plenty of video game references, Tapper, Metal Gear Solid, the Contra code is in here. Cubert actually plays a relatively large role. And I kind of thought that there might actually be some Marvel-based video games or some ESPN-based sports games in this, with it being a Disney film and, Disney owned Marvel and ESPN, but actually, no, there weren't. But actually, as it turns out, after the first sort of half hour, when Ralph arrives in that game, Sugar Rush, it actually stops making as many video game related jokes and references and actually just becomes a good solid story. I really enjoyed the first half hour, thinking, this is exactly what I was expecting, this is exactly what I wanted this film to be, a lot of jokes, a lot of gags, this is really enjoyable. And then it sort of stops being that kind of film after the first half hour and just becomes a good solid story about an outcast, in fact a couple of outcasts, just trying to find their place in the respective games that they're in. Ralph feeling an outcast because he's the bad guy in the game that he's in, and Penelope being an outcast because she's a glitch in her game. It's interesting, really. I enjoyed the first half hour, but now that I think about it, having seen the whole film, I actually kind of wish the first half hour had just been the same as the remaining hour of the film, really. I kind of wish the whole film really had just been the sort of solid story that the last hour of this film is. So anyway, the thing that really sort of drives this story of the film, I think, really is the relationship between Ralph and Penelope. It's interesting. It's an adult and a kid relationship, but it's not really a parent and offspring type relationship. It's not a father-daughter relationship like you might expect it to be. It is just simply a friendship, basically, between the two of them. They just happen to be an adult and a kid. The main introduction of Penelope basically is that it's not so much that they're awkward around one another or that they dislike one another. It's that Penelope is rather annoying, and Ralph finds her rather annoying, and that actually worked as quite a good tool to get us to sort of sympathise with Ralph a little bit more, because he was finding Penelope annoying, and it was that kind of sort of good kind of annoying that you find kind of amusing at the same time. It's kind of interesting. The antagonist of this film, King Candy, he was also kind of annoying, but he was more sort of a sort of bad kind of annoying. I'm not sure if that was maybe intentional. Penelope is annoying but likeable. King Candy is annoying but also dislikable. Not entirely sure if that makes sense, but whatever. Yeah, the first half hour of this film, it was enjoyable, but at the same time I don't really remember much about it now, having seen the whole film. It's kind of forgettable, because the last hour of the film is so much better and so much radically different. It's just a solid story in the last hour, so that's kind of interesting. I kind of feel bad now that I wanted this just to be a film that had a lot of jokes and a lot of references in it. It's actually just a solid film, as it turns out. Ralph and Penelope, and them, trying to get accomplish something more out of life and get more recognition for what they do. A lot of fun to watch the two of them together. And that scene where Ralph decides, he's got to destroy her car, for her own good, to basically save her own life. One of the most emotional scenes I've seen in an animated Disney film in quite a while. I don't remember having to hold back tears at any point watching The Princess and the Frog or Tangled. I mean, they're both good films, but I don't remember any really heavily emotional scenes. But That scene in this film where Ralph is destroying that car, I was honestly trying to hold back tears. That was such a sort of heavily emotional scene. That was really well done, that scene. Ralph goes back to his own game, and then he comes back in because, he finds out a bit more about Vanellope and, perhaps that things aren't what they seem. And then when he sees her again the next time, he's fixed the car, and she's locked in King Candy's fungeon. That's kind of strange, last time we see her she sort of runs off back to her home because she's upset about him destroying the car, and now she's locked in the fungeon. When did that happen? Don't quite follow that. But anyway, it was a sort of nice sort of little scene that we see things get resolved, and then that last act was just sort of a lot of fun, with that race with the go-karts. It's interesting actually, the first half hour is all these video game jokes. Then for the rest of the film, with the majority of the film taking place in Sugar Rush, it's mostly sweet-related jokes actually. So that's kind of disappointing really in a video game-based game, that actually most of the jokes are sweet-related. It's something I don't quite understand. In fact, two things actually I don't quite understand. They don't make it particularly clear in the early stages. Ralph is obligated to play the role of the bad guy in the game that he's in. Did he choose this role, or was he just sort of born into it? Are characters in video games, are they born into these roles and are forced to play out these roles for the rest of their lives, or do they actually choose to play these roles, I wonder? It would have been kind of more an interesting kind of insight into Ralph's character, to know whether or not he chose to be the bad guy in the first place, or whether or not this is just something he's been forced into ever since, the day he was born. But they never make that particularly clear. And then Vanellope, obviously, I don't know if she ever sort of knew exactly who she was while she was a glitch, or whether or not perhaps her memory was erased along with everyone else's when King Candy hacked into the game and reprogrammed it. But the game resets when she crosses the finish line. It's the sort of crucial sort of resolution to the entire thing, and just sort of resolves everything. Why exactly does the game reset when she crosses the finish line? I don't understand that. That just seems a bit sort of too convenient to me, that everything would be resolved just by her crossing the finish line like that. Don't quite understand that. Obviously there's also Felix, main character from Ralph's game, the main character from the first-person shooter, Hero's Duty. Hero's Duty, actually, I actually assumed from the title was going to be a sort of a Call of Duty clone. It's actually similar to Halo. It's more of a sort of sci-fi based first-person shooter. Yeah. That sequence in Hero's Duty actually was a lot of fun. That's it's reminding me a lot of the sort of general sort of first-person shooters that I'm used to playing. It actually was sort of very accurate to how those games really are. I would like to have seen more of that. I would like to have seen Ralph sort of jump about from game to game a bit more. Actually, it got a bit tiring. Seeing quite so much of this film in Sugar Rush. I'm kind of in sort of two minds about what I wanted this film to be. Did I want it to just have a lot of parodirizing and making fun of video games and have a lot of jokes relating to that in there? Or did I just want it to be a solid story, which I didn't expect it to be going into the film? But anyway, the romance between Felix and that woman from Hero's Duty, did not care for that at all. That was kind of pointless to me. It's interesting actually that Ralph is the best man at the wedding at the end of that. It kind of makes me wonder, what kind of relationship did he and Felix sort of have? They don't really spend a huge amount of time together in the film. Were they already quite good friends prior to the events of this film? I mean, it must be difficult to be friends with someone that in the video game that you're in, you're actually enemies. So how can you be friends in reality? I don't know how that relationship would kind of work. Again, would be interesting to see a sequel maybe that is maybe more of an insight into their relationship. But ultimately, really, it's interesting how this is really more sort of Vanellope's story, and I think actually the story to this film could have worked a bit better had Vanellope been the main character, actually, because it's really her that really sort of more accomplishes something and really sort of achieves more in her life from the events of this film than Ralph does. Ralph just sort of helps out along the way and gains maybe a bit more sort of personal satisfaction from having helped her out. But yeah, I definitely came out of this film wanting a sequel, certainly, which obviously cannot be a bad thing. The end credits as well, that was another thing. They were pretty awesome, references to like Sonic and Street Fighter 2 in there. One last thing I want to say about this film, the twist towards the end, where the true identity of the villain, King Candy, is revealed. Brilliant, fantastic twist. Absolutely did not see that coming. That was fantastic, that bit. I just kind of sort of wonder, if this film could have been a little bit better with a few sort of changes, to the basic structure. Perhaps if it had been more just solid story throughout the entire film, without the first half hour perhaps being mostly video game jokes. It maybe just takes a bit too long to get to the Ralph-Vanellope relationship, which is really the main thing that sort of drives this film. But at the same time, I enjoyed the video game references and the video game jokes at the same time. So it's a difficult dilemma to be in. You know, you kind of want the film to be one thing, but you also want it to be another thing. It can't really be both at the same time, even though it does sort of try to be both at the same time. And again, perhaps, you know, Vanellope crossing the finishing line and the game resets and it turns out she was the princess the whole time. It all seems a bit too convenient to me at the end there. But otherwise, the story to this film was very solid. Could have been a more sort of solid kind of setup, I think, to Ralph's character, and perhaps more development and more backstory, perhaps to Vanellope's character, would have made this film just a little bit more solid. But for the most part, it was definitely a good, solid story with perhaps not as many video game references as I would have been hoping for, but enough, I think, to keep me satisfied. My main concern, actually, I think, maybe for the mainstream audiences, perhaps a lot of these video game references would be kind of wasted on, you know, kids who maybe haven't played retro games. Like the Metal Gear Solid reference with that exclamation mark, the Contra code, tappers and qubit references in there. I'm not sure kids nowadays, you know, who haven't played those games, I don't think they're going to get those references. So yeah, a good, solid story. Perhaps could have used a little bit more time developing the two main characters though. But otherwise it was pretty damn good. Not outstanding, but pretty good. Okay, I will see you again soon, guys.